Good morning, children. This lecture is for class 6th, subject Social Science, chapter number 2 of History, and the name of the chapter is From Hunting Gathering to Growing Food, and it's going to be our lecture number 2. As in lecture number 1, we already discussed about hunters and gatherers and why were they moving from one place to another. In this particular lecture, we'll talk about some more topics in which we'll discuss how these hunter-gatherers, they started growing crops and they started rearing the animals, and after then they started living the settled life on a particular place. So let's see the topics that we'll discuss today. Change in environment, painting of earliest time, beginning of farming, rearing animals, storing grains, purposes of storing grains means why they started storing the grain, domestication, what does it mean, and settled life means the life on a particular place instead of moving from one place to another. So let's see the topics one by one. Change in environment. Hunting to rearing. Rearing means to take care of the animals or keeping animals. So how the people of earliest time, they started rearing the animals instead of hunting animals. Environment got changed around 12,000 years ago. Nearly 12,000 years ago, the climate became warmer, and due to that change, the new grasslands developed, and number of animals like deer, goat, sheep, etc. were increased. As these all animals, they are dependent on grasslands, so as the grasslands developed, so number of these animals, that was also increased. And after then we'll discuss about that complete process also, how they started rearing some of the animals. Beginning of farming. The people of that particular time, they identify edible plants first of all, because they did not have any of the knowledge with them, any of the equipment. So from the surrounding, they just identified the edible plants, means the plants those were able to eat. They observed how did seed break off, means how from the seed the new plant that grow. Then they understood that a plant grows from a seed. Then after, first of all, the first step they understood from the environment that how a plant that grows. Then requirement of water, they got that the particular plant that need the water also, so that is the requirement of the plant. They learnt about the ripening period of the plant also, means how much a particular plant is taking the time to ripen. So that complete process, due to that complete process, they were learning from the environment only, and they started growing the crops. So the first crops that they grow, they were wheat and barley. The first crops that they started growing, they were wheat and barley. Now rearing animals. As the first thing we discussed, hunting to rearing. Now the complete process we will be learning here how they started rearing animals, the particular animals they had taken. Like people attracted towards gentle animals like sheep, goat, etc. Why the gentle animals? The gentle animals, those were not harming them. Those were gentle to them. So they first of all they attracted towards those animals. Then they protected them, these animals, from attacks of wild animals, as they were living there in the different forest areas, and in that areas different wild animals were also available. So they were protecting all these gentle animals from the attacks of wild animals. Then first two reared animals were sheep and goat. first two crop they started growing were wheat and barley, and first two reared animals by them were sheep and goat. Animals became beneficial for the people as they gave them milk. Animals were also used as transport, means from moving place to place. Then these animals were used to carry loads also. So there can be a particular question also, that how the rearing of animal that became beneficial for the earliest people. So it became beneficial because these animals were giving milk to them. They used them as a transport also, and even they were using the animals for carrying loads. So clear what animals they started keep rearing and how they attracted towards the particular animals. So this was the process how they started growing, how they learned from the environment that plants are grown, and how they started rearing animals. The next topic it is storing grain. When they started growing their own crops, so obviously the part that surplus of the grain they were having extra after the using, so they started storing that grain. So that now the people, where did they store the grain? They stored the grain in clay pots. The pots those were made up of mud, woven baskets. Woven means buni hui, different thatch or the different material they took and they wove the baskets. Those baskets they used for storing the grain, and even they dug pit in the ground, the hole there in the ground to store the grain. Now what were the purposes for storing grain? Why were they storing that particular grain? Because they need that particular grain for the seed for the next crop, as food they need for the complete year, as gift they were giving to different relatives or different people. So that is why they started they started storing the grain, and as the food of animals. They started rearing the gentle animals. So for the food of those animals also they needed that storage of grain. So here two things we covered. First thing, that where the people of earliest time they started storing the food, and second, what were the purposes for storing those particular things or the grain. The next topic is domestication. What does it mean? What is this domestication? It is the name given to the process in which people grow plants and look after animals. Means the process in which the people they grow their own crop and they look after the animals is known as domestication. As the people of this particular time, when the environment got changed or it became warmer, due to different changes in the environment, they started taking care of the animals, they started looking after the animals, and they started growing the plants also. So that process was known as domestication. Now, settled life. As I told in the starting, that when all these things the people they started doing, or they started keeping the animals, they started growing their own crops. So what was the reason that they started living the settled life? People started living settled life in Neolithic age. If you remember, in the previous lecture we talked about the three stone ages. One was Paleolithic, the old stone age, then Mesolithic, and the last one it was Neolithic. And Neolithic that was started from 10,000 years ago, and as environment got changed nearly 12,000 years ago, so slowly and gradually the people they learned how to grow the crop, and in particular Neolithic age they started living the settled life because now they became farmers. Reasons for living settled life on a particular place instead of moving from one place to another, the reasons were to look after the plants. Obviously, if we now also, if we can take example, if we grow any of the plant, that plant needs the care from the particular farmer or particular person. if suppose any farmer who is growing wheat crop, so for that particular time period the farmer gives really lot of care to that particular plant, isn't it? So that time also, to look after the plant, they started settled life. To get the ripened crop also, for getting the ripened crop means the crops those were ripened one, पकी हुई. So for that they started living the settled life. Now painting of earliest time means what type of paintings the people in earliest time were doing. Some of the paintings of this time were found in Madhya Pradesh and Uttar Pradesh on the cave walls or in the caves. These paintings were of wild animals. Means most of the painters or the people, they were painting the paintings of wild animals basically. The paintings were having great accuracy. You can see one of the picture given in your book also, that most of the paintings they drawn, they were the paintings of wild animals. Clear? So this was the painting area of that particular time. Now the homework time. As in today's lecture we covered about the particular time period that in Mesolithic age the environment that got changed, and due to that the new grasslands they developed, and due to that the number of animals increased. People they adopted the gentle animals, they started caring those animals, so started rearing the animals, and after then they also learned how the different plants they are grown in the particular areas. Now the homework. Do the following questions. How did domestication of animals prove beneficial for the early men? Different reasons that it became the beneficial for the early men. Second is, why do people who grow crops have to stay in the same place for a long time period? Means why they started living the settled life, what were the reasons? Then the third one, what did people do to store grain? Means here what were they doing for storing the grain? Number 4, mention the purposes for which grain had to be stored. Clear? In the third you have to write where they were storing, and in fourth you have to write what were the purposes for storing the grain. Now this is time for homework solution of chapter number 2, lecture 1. Why did hunter-gatherers travel from one place to another? Hunter-gatherers traveled from one place to another due to the following reasons. They moved from one place to another in search of food. They followed the animals. They moved in search of plants and trees for fruits. They moved in search of water. They also traveled to meet their relatives. Then second question it was, how were stone tools used in the past? The stone tools were used in the past to cut meat, scrap barks from trees, chop fruits and roots, hunt animals, dig the ground. So these were the different uses of the stone tools in the past. Number 3 it was, how did the early men discover fire? List 3 ways in which hunter-gatherers used fire. Means the first portion of the that particular question you have to define how the fire was discovered, and the second part you have to write that how they were using it. First part, it was probably an accidental discovery. While rubbing 2 pieces of stones, sparks must have been produced. These sparks created fire. Means accidentally the 2 stones they were rubbing the stones, and due to that the sparks they produced, and that was the reason for creation of the fire. Then the 3 ways in which hunter-gatherers used fire were to scare wild animals, as we know that they are scared with the light or lightning. So that is why they were using it to scare the wild animals, to cook meat, or you can say roast meat, to keep them warm in winter season, and even they were using for the purpose of lightning. So these were the different questions. Number 4 it was, write the names of 3 stone ages. 3 stone ages were Paleolithic age from 2 million years to 12,000 years ago, Mesolithic age from 12,000 years to 10,000 years ago, and Neolithic, that was after 10,000 years ago. The last question it was, what do you mean by microliths? Micro means small, lith they were the stones. So small tools used in Mesolithic period were known as microliths. As we had seen one picture also in which the size of the stone that was decreasing and then they were becoming the sharper one. So small tools those were used in Mesolithic period were known as microliths. They were stuck to the handles even of bones or wood. Means some of those tools were having handles on them. For example, saws and sickles. So these were the questions that you got in the previous lecture as homework. I hope that you have understood the topics that we have covered today. So thank you and have a nice day.